started. Okay. All right. So good evening, everyone. I am attorney Robyn McCoy, and I was having a conversation with Sharon and talked about some of the programs that I do. I do workshops on expungement, or now we call it the clean slate legislation, what to do when stopped by the police, also how to navigate the school system. So I do criminal defense, family law, educational advocacy. I just helped, I had a case where a child was looking at 30 days suspension for something that they picked up off of TikTok, and we were able to avoid that 30 days suspension. He was a straight A student and got caught up with some things. And attorney Ed Taylor, he's kind of shy. He's been practicing 24 years. He does criminal defense, landlord tenant, and he has a background as a social worker, teacher, and a lawyer. So he assists me with some of the programming, kind of like whether he wants to or not. He comes out. So clean slate legislation. How many of you here have heard of the legislation? Okay. So you've heard of it. So what used to be with the legislation is for expungement, and expungement is actually setting aside a conviction, is that you could have one felony, like it used to be one felony, one misdemeanor, then it evolved and it was like one felony, two misdemeanors. The new laws that came into effect on April 11th are up to 3 felonies, unlimited misdemeanors, and you can get it. You have to wait 5 years for the first felony, or it could be a serious misdemeanor. For the second and third, it has to be 7 years for the second and third felony. And then you have to, for the misdemeanors, it can be 3 years as long as they're not considered serious misdemeanors. And you can have only up to 2 assaultive offenses set aside from the conviction. You can't have more than, like if you have a 10-year offense, you can have that, but you can't have two of the same 10-year offenses. You can't have, like I'll give you scenarios because I think it helps when I'm talking to the public about it. I have a person that asked me about 2 uttering and publishings. Those are like 14-year offenses. So they can't have 2 uttering and publishings. They can get, like I have a person, he had 2 assault with intent to do great bodily harm, which are 10-year offenses, and he had another offense, and we looked over the statute, talked to the Attorney General's office, and basically he can only have one of those assault with intent to do great bodily harm offenses set aside. So in some ways, I mean, I've been to some of the trainings for the lawyers, and I'm actually doing a training for the lawyers myself because I'm getting a lot of lawyers asking me like, how do we do this? I've been doing these workshops for about 7 years. I will say there's some exciting things about the legislation that it is more expansive. A lot of times we would do these workshops, we'd pass out the application, and then people would come up and we would pull their iChat and we would assess eligibility, and most people would not necessarily be eligible, and we'd have to turn them away. We'd have to refer them to a pardon attorney like Stuart Friedman or Rudy Sierra or something like that. So now we're turning less people away, but what I will say about actual implementation of the legislation is that what they have said is that there are probably a couple million people in Michigan that are eligible, but you don't have enough. Well, we have enough attorneys, but you don't have the funding available for the attorneys. So if you're in Detroit, they have clean slate, and they have the city of Detroit. If you're a Detroit resident, they'll do it for free, but they're backlogged right now. You also have the LADA is doing it, Lakeshore Legal Aid. If you're indigent, you qualify, you can get it set aside. In Washtenaw County, if you're a resident, you can get it set aside. There are fairs that are going on, and the traditional fairs for expungement are ones where we will pull the person's iChat, which is a $10 fee. So sometimes we'll get people to donate, for like, maybe we'll say we'll do 50 people, and you have somebody donate for $10 for each person to do the iChat. You pull the iChat. Now, the iChat is the Michigan State Police website. And that's where you put in, you have to have the person's full name, their date of birth, their race, and their gender. And you want to be clear about the name too, because I have a lady that has a case, she has a couple cases back from the 70s, and so she gave me her old name, and we looked it up and we saw what she had on there. And so that's what I start with expungement. That's what everybody starts with really, is you look up what's called the iChat. And I'm gonna pass around a sign-up sheet if you guys wanna put your name, number, and email, and I can have my assistant email you the application and some of the materials, like reference materials that I have gathered as I have been doing this. Like I started in February of this year, even before the law went into effect, and I was talking to, I know we had Ranjiv here, state reps and state senators about this, like, because I was like, we want to make sure that there's input from prosecutors, but especially criminal defense attorneys, because we're seeing people, because it's not like some people are like, oh, we don't know about clearing up people's records, but it's like you have some people that's like 20 or 30 years and they had a couple of offenses, or like I had somebody that had one drunk driving in college, and that was like 20 years ago. And now I'm happy to say in February 19th, the new legislation will go into effect. So that's what's added on, is now if you have a first drunk driving offense, you can have that taken off your record. Now, I know some people get funny about it, but I mean, if it's just one offense, now they're not going to do it if you have it where it's like I've had people that have 4 and 5 drunk driving offenses. No, they're not. If you got a serious problem, that's not going to happen. It's just for one, you get one bite of the apple. And so, and then you have like the misdemeanor expungement. So they actually have a separate application. I'm going to pass around one of the main applications. Let's see, so you guys can see what that looks like. I pulled it up. Here, you can just pass that around. So you start off when you're doing an expungement assessment. As I said, you look at eligibility. And that's one of the biggest issues. And what I had a guy the other day, he was like chasing me. He's like, I want you to do this. I'm trying to, because I've been flooded with calls, and because I do these workshops, and people know that this is one of my specializations, is doing expungements. And he wanted me, he's like, well, I've been wanting to do this. I did the application. And he's like, I want you to handle it. I want you to do the rest of it. And I said, well, let me call the AG's office first and see that you're eligible, because I'm not going to take your money. And if you're going to, because the AG is basically like, I'm a teacher. So it's like the AG is like the grader. And they have the power. They decide, they look at the eligibility and they assess eligibility. And then if so if they say you're not eligible, then the judges and the prosecutors typically will listen to them. Now they could be, if they make a mistake, you can respond and you can say that they've made a mistake. Or if there's something, like I had one case recently where they said, well, he's not eligible till December 7th. And I was like, okay, then why don't we just set the hearing for December 8th? I'm like, you guys really took the time to write a response, and and they're like, well, yeah, but we're just following our protocol. So I want to go over like what offenses can be expunged and what can't, because that's one of the big questions that come up. If you have a life offense, like a murder or rape case, that cannot be expunged. If you have something like second-degree child abuse, committing a second-degree child abuse in the presence of another child sexually abusive material, or other activities, you cannot get that expunged. Certain offenses involving the use of a computer, soliciting sex with a minor, stalking, causing death by explosives, second and third-degree criminal sexual conduct, that cannot be expunged from your record. Assault with intent to commit criminal sexual conduct can't be expunged. Fourth-degree criminal sexual conduct, it will depend. So if it's an attempt to commit fourth-degree criminal sexual conduct, if the offense occurred after January 12, 2015, typically that cannot be expunged. If it's before, you may have some wiggle room. There's also some new ways. There's been a movement afoot. Like if a person, maybe they're both 15 or something, and they caught a CSC, their boyfriend and girlfriend, you might be able to go back and reverse that criminal sexual conduct and get them off the sex offender registry. Like if it's like a boyfriend and girlfriend situation, it's not the situation with a grown person, like a 40-year-old with a 15-year-old. You know, you might be able to have some wiggle room with that. Operating while impaired, as of February 19th of next year, will be able to come off if it's the first offense. You can't get, if it's committing a traffic offense as a person with a commercial driver's license operating a commercial vehicle, you cannot get that expunged. If it's any traffic offenses that involve death or injury, you cannot get that expunged. Felony domestic violence, if the applicant has a previous misdemeanor for domestic violence. Human trafficking offenses. Now, human trafficking, if you're the victim of human trafficking, yes, you can. But if you're the perpetrator, no. Terrorism-related offenses, convictions for attempts to commit any of these offenses. And so, again, not more than 3 felonies. The significance of that is, and that's why you have to, I would say, because some people have asked me, like, can lay people do this, help with this process? Lay people can help as far as pulling up people's iChats. Like if we do fairs, like I just did a fair on Saturday, they had about 25 people. If you can pull up the iChat, where you need the attorney is the attorney to look at eligibility. Sometimes I can look at somebody's iChat because it's gonna list all their, typically it should list all of their criminal record. Sometimes it may not. Sometimes I may have to look at that district court or circuit court where they have the offense to get more details. But if it listed on the iChat, then I look up the statute and I see if they're eligible. Sometimes it can take me, it might take me 10, 15 minutes to assess whether a person is eligible or not. Sometimes it takes longer because I may need to do some more research on it. You know, I may need to pull up some more things about it, or I may, as I said, I go directly, for me, I look at the source, the AG's office. I will talk to them, although I know some of my friends that are appeals attorneys are like, they're not always the source. If they make a mistake, you can always appeal. That is true. You do have that option of appealing if they're not correctly reading the law. So you can't have more than 2 convictions for an assaultive crime, and not more than 1 conviction can be for the same offense that is punishable by more than 10 years in prison. There's the one bad night provision. So if you have something that happens, because we have been very, in the criminal defense bar, advocating for this, like one bad night. Maybe you have a lot of stuff that happens at the same night, so you can get all of those felonies or misdemeanors expunged, except you can't, if they're assaultive convictions, no. If they're convictions involving use, possession of a dangerous weapon, no. And if it's convictions with a maximum penalty of 10 years or more imprisonment, then no. You can't get and that to me, that frustrates me because Ed and I, you know, we can tell you get a lot of people that have like a felony firearm, felonious assault, and a felon in possession. So it's like that's assaultive and that's guns. And why can't you have that? What if that was 20, 30 years ago and you're gone to college, you're working, you know, and I don't see why that couldn't come off. It can come off if all 3 are eligible individually, but it can't come off on the one bad night exception. There's a separate application, like I just passed around the generic application, but if for the misdemeanors, there's a separate application for that. In October of next year, the automatic expungement will go into effect, but automatic expungement is for certain offenses. It can be 7 years for the misdemeanor, 10 years for the felony. It can only be up to 2 felonies and 4 misdemeanors. So what that means is you're going to have to wait for the government for them to get their everything in order and to actually get that set aside. And they're saying, they used to say it was going to go into effect in December. Then the last I heard from the government officials is that it's going to go into effect in April because because we already have a system that's flooded with criminal cases and there's clerks. You know, I know in Wayne County there's clerks they need more clerks. You know, so they're hiring. So if you know anybody looking for work at Frank Murphy, they're hiring it over there. So they're already flooded. They're already trying to deal with the light of the pandemic, keep catching up with everything. And so it's what I get a lot of people, they're like, look, I don't have time to wait for a clean slate because it's a waiting list. I don't have time to wait for Lakeshore. I'm going to come to you, Ms. McCoy. You know, there are some people that I have been able to help. I said I would do some pro bono, but I still have a firm. So I'm doing it at a reduced rate. You know, I know my dad gets fussy about that. He and I, both are celebrating anniversaries. In November, I will have been practicing for 20 years, and my dad has been practicing for 40. And my dad, he does not do criminal, he does not do family law. He's the one who got me into family law. He's like, oh, you should, women are good at family law. I'm like, yeah, no, Dad, you just don't want to do it anymore. So he doesn't do criminal either. He does like more wrongful death, personal injury. We do have a case together. I don't know if you guys heard of that one case with a little boy that got shot in Ypsilanti. We have that case that we're working on together. We're trying to make sure that, you know, I have my background as an advocate for children, so we're really trying to make sure that our client, Kobe, that he gets all the counseling that he needs and all the supports, all of that. And so, yeah, so for me, it's more than just, I think of this as like a ministry. I'm a spiritual person. So, you know, when Judge Thomas recruited me, she and I'm not the only one she recruited. She's called the expungement queen. So I'm a Disney person. So I consider myself an expungement princess. Yes, I have Disney Plus. I mean, I need to watch it more, but, I have to deal with Ed. Ed watches the news, sports, and all that, History Channel. So I have to go. I have my other TV. I can watch my Disney. But so this is a ministry because it's about redemption. It's about helping people to get their records cleared. Most of the people that have come to me, they have said, they're like, Ms. McCoy, I got a job, but then they saw my record from 20, 30 years ago. I can't keep the job. And they're like, oh, I feel so bad about this. And so that's saddening to me. So that's what motivates me, and that's what motivates me to do trainings. I'm planning to do a training in November to train other attorneys because I'll say, you know, we assess some people can't afford a lawyer. So I'll say, can some of you guys commit to doing pro bono? And we did do that from April. We had an April fair, and we got some attorneys. We're still looking for about 8 attorneys to do about 8 people from our list, and it's multiple jurisdictions. It's like Macomb, Ingham. Like, we did get some attorneys that for Wayne, they're comfortable with Wayne, because it can be, you know, I'm gonna actually go through the process for you now. It can be a tedious process. So you have to, how do you start? As I said, first you do the iChat. You try to assess whether the person is eligible. Once you determine that they're eligible, then you need to get the certified record of conviction from the court where they got the conviction. And so you could actually have one application if they have, like, let's say I have a lot of people at Frank Murphy. They have 3 offenses, so I have one application that I'm doing, and they get one set of fingerprints. Now, I also have people where I have 3 or 5 applications in 5 different jurisdictions because they had them in different courts. So then they have to get 5 sets of fingerprint cards. That's where it gets tedious. And some lawyers don't want to deal with that. So I have to get the certified record of conviction from each case. And there's usually a fee. It could be $10 to $15. You got to call the court and find out. So that's some of that stuff. As I said, I have a legal assistant. That's some stuff that lay people can do. Like if they're like, maybe they can't afford to pay, like some attorneys charge $2,500 or $1,500. You know, right now I'm charging like $750 to $1,000. It just depends on what it is. But if some people are like, look, I can't afford all that, if they do some of the legwork, if you get the fingerprints and the certified record of conviction, then that can cut down on the cost. So you get the certified record of conviction, then we fill out the application, and, you know, as I pass around the application, it's going to ask, has there been a prior filing for an expungement, because that's a factor. You know, was it accepted or denied? I have a lady that she was denied, and she qualified. This is even before the new law passed, and I think that the judge had some misconceptions about her. So we're trying to work to help correct that. And so with the application, that's where, you know, I'm going to go over the application, and I'm going to talk about some of the additional things that you can add to the application to bolster your application. So you fill out the application. It has to be notarized. We have a notary, whether we're in Wayne County or Washtenaw, we have a notary. they notarize it. You can't have any pending cases. And so we fill out the whole application. You have to have 5 copies of the application. And once you have that, then, and notarized, you send it out. It has to go out to the court where the conviction arose, or convictions. It has to go out to the Michigan State Police, and you have to write a check for $50. And so that's where we get into, sometimes it's sponsors for people that may not be able to afford that $50 fee. So $50 to the state of Michigan. You have to send it to the Michigan Attorney General's office, and they have a division that deals with it. It's on the application. You have to send it to the prosecutor where the case was prosecuted. And then you keep a copy for yourself. You keep a copy for yourself, and then I have it where my assistant is tracking. We're tracking every case. And right now, the turnaround time for the actual expungement, as I would say, maybe 4 to 5 months. So because it's taking from the state of Michigan, it's taken about 2 months. So that's where I would say where we could benefit from having more lay people to help with when you get the fingerprints, send the fingerprints in. That's where you send them to the Michigan State Police, and they do a statewide check of your background. And where we would benefit is if we had more people over there at the Michigan State Police, and we could turn it around and not have to wait 2 months to get a fingerprint background check. Where we could have more, if we have more clerks. I'm specifically saying Frank Murphy, and they know I've talked to the chief judge, I've emailed them, called them, Frank Murphy, but some other places are faster, some other places are still slow. So if we could expedite that part of the process, then we have to get back the fingerprint, like the background check from the Michigan State Police. We have to get a response from the Attorney General's office. They're either gonna green light it or they're gonna say no. So once we get that, then we can have the hearing. I am pleased to say though that in Frank Murphy, some of the prosecutors and the judge some of them have agreed to do a stipulation to set aside the conviction without a hearing. If they get the green light from the Attorney General, then they'll do that, and then you don't have to have a hearing. I will say I've had hearings since this new law has gone into effect. When you go to the hearing, that's where I'm saying you want to have supporting documents. If this is a drug offense, you want to show that you have gone to drug rehab. You want to show that if it's mental health issues, that you've gotten mental health treatment. You want to show that whatever positive things that you may have done. You created your own business. You've gone to college. And I tell people, because they may not meet eligibility right now, we may be 5 years away or 3 years away. Get started on that now, doing community service, working at a soup kitchen, getting documentation, getting letters of support from your friends and family, that people can say, look, I know him, he was young and dumb, because they say the adult brain doesn't fully mature until the age of 26. They've just expanded HIDA, because HIDA used to be 17 to 21. They've just expanded it. I think it's like 25, 26 as at the beginning of October, because I was just working a case the other day, and they didn't put HIDA on my client's case. And I was like, oh, we need to come back on this because he's eligible he could be eligible. So I'm like, we need to come back on this. And so you want to make sure you have attorneys that are conscientious of these expungement laws too, because when they're entering into a plea, this can factor into, the first thing I try to do is get the case dismissed, or I try to get some kind of diversion where the person won't have a record. But you want to have an attorney that's mindful of this, because in Washtenaw County, before we got our new prosecutor, Progressive, they would try to stick it to my client. They would give them 2 felonies, even though the old law was 1 felony and 2 misdemeanors. So you want to be mindful. If you're, and I'm not saying that you guys necessarily having to deal with it, but maybe you have friends, families, when they're doing a plea, what are they pleading to? Are they pleading to something that can be expungable in the future? Or are they pleading to something that's gonna hinder them and they're gonna have to wait for the governor to do pardons? And I've reached out to the governor's office about pardons. She's not doing pardons right now. She's up for re-election. She may do pardons on her way out. Maybe if there's more community support for her to do pardons, we can get into pardons. Again, for people that's like 20, 30 years ago, and they haven't done anything new. They haven't gotten in trouble. We're not talking about somebody that's just all constantly a repeat offender. Like I've had people. One of the cases I had, the judge, he had like 8 breaking enterings, and it was the old Judge Margie Braxton. I don't know if you guys remember her, and she was like, "You're not good at this. You need to get another job because you obviously." So we're not talking about somebody that's got like that kind of issue going on, but we're talking about folks that have just made mistakes. They were young and they made mistakes. So once you go to court, and if you get it set aside, then the court is supposed to send it to the Michigan State Police and to the police agency where you got the conviction. I also, once I get my order set inside the conviction, I send it myself. I send it to the Michigan State Police. I send it to the police office. I keep a copy for myself. I have my client keep a copy. You want to check 6 weeks after to make sure it's off the iChat. If it's not off the iChat, you call MSP, the Michigan State Police, and you say, "Did you guys get a copy of the order setting aside the conviction?" If they say no, you send them a copy because you want to make sure it comes off. Once it comes off, then that can free people up in terms of their, being able to get jobs, housing, education. Now, it does not completely go away for like if you're applying for the FBI or something like that, they still have a non-public record. But what it does is there are a lot of people who want to work. I can tell you, I'm getting calls from them every day, and it just gives them the opportunity to be able to work and take care of themselves and their family. And I think everybody wants that, as opposed to the opposite, like people having to get on cash assistance, food stamps, and being dependent on the government, things like that. So that's all I have. Dave, I don't know if you want to turn this off so we can answer questions. Yeah, thank you. So.